Alrighty, we are picking up with lesson 2.5 special functions, and here is another one. It is called the greatest integer function. The greatest integer function, it's kind of fascinating. What it does is it returns the greatest integer less than or equal to your x value, whatever you were, whatever your input was. It looks kind of like what you see here. It is kind of like a stair-step looking function. Lots of little pieces here. And the way it's written is f of x equals, and then in kind of those brackets like that, the x, where x is going to be a real number. So let's evaluate a greatest integer function when x is 2, 3/2, -2/3, and -5. So beginning with 2. Ask yourself, what is the greatest integer less than or equal to 2? Well, this requires you to remind yourself what an integer is. An integer is going to be a whole number like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or their opposites, which are -1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is 2 an integer? Yes, it is. So the result would just be 2, because the greatest integer less than or equal to 2 is 2. If it's equal to, that trumps less than. All right, so moving on to example now 2 here. What is the greatest integer less than or equal to 3/2? Well, maybe it would help if we wrote this as a decimal. 3/2 is the same thing as 1.5, and 1.5 is definitely not an integer. So we ask ourselves, what is the greatest integer less than this number? Well, the greatest of all of them that are less than would be 1. That is the integer just before 1.5 on your number line. What about the greatest integer less than or equal to -2/3? Well, -2/3 is definitely not an integer. Maybe writing it as a decimal will help. -2/3 is -0.6 repeating. So what is the greatest integer? Think on your number line that is just to the left, just less than -0.6. It would be -1. And if you're having a hard time visualizing this, I would encourage you to draw out your number line and plot these points on it, because I think that will help to make it much clearer. All right, what is the greatest integer less than or equal to -5? Well, ladies and gentlemen, -5 is an integer, so it's -5. This is kind of a fun function to work with. Another type of function that we are going to see and use this year are absolute value functions. And absolute value functions are really a type of piece function, just like the greatest integer functions were a type of piece function. Here is the function rule that kind of defines what absolute value functions are. They are x if x is greater than 0, and they are -x if x is less than 0. So it kind of makes like a V shape, because you have two lines that are perpendicular to each other and meet. Where they meet is kind of where that V is formed. So they won't always look just like the one we saw. That is kind of the most basic, but you can have translations. Now, to translate something means to move it. So how can we make movements with our absolute value function? Well, you can shift right or left, or you can shift up or down. And you'll see in just a moment why I put inside and outside. You will move to the right if inside of the absolute value, h is less than 0. And you will, here's an example of that. If you have, like this, x minus h, that's actually going to shift it to the right. I know it might seem a little strange because of the fact that you would think, oh, well, if I want to move to the right, don't I add? Here, inside the absolute values, it's opposite movement than you would anticipate. So I want you all to try and give an example like a g function that would move to the right. Now, movement to the left happens when you take your x value and add some positive h value there. An example would be f of x equals, and then inside the absolute value, x plus 6. That would shift that function in your coordinate plane 6 units to the left. Now, shifting up, moving your absolute value function up, occurs when you add something outside of your absolute value. And if it's a positive value, it will move it up. So this function here would be moved up 7 units. Now, if you subtract something outside of the absolute value, then it's going to move down. Like here, we would move our parent function down. That basic absolute value would be moved down 5 units. So try and come up with some g functions that would follow these translations and share them in class for some BHAG tickets. We're going to analyze this graph and figure out what would be the rule that describes it. Okay, so we have to think. Has it moved right or left from that original? Look back at the bottom of page 3. That was the original. Did it move right or left? Yeah, it moved left 1 unit. Okay, now did it move up or down? Yes, it moved down 2 units. So movement to the left, that's going to be inside your absolute value, and it's going to be a +1. And movement down is outside of your absolute value, and it is a -2. So your function would be f of x equals the absolute value of x plus 1 minus 2. And ladies and gentlemen, that is all that I have for you. Please write down any questions that you have, any concerns, or any statements like, oh, I understood this because of maybe something else you've learned, so that we can share it with our classmates. Thanks. Have a wonderful rest of your day or night. Signing off now. Goodbye.